If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce Maguire, and you are listening to the Jonbenet Ramsey series. This is episode 5, Conflicting Theories, and we will take a look at the main theories, the problems with the theories. Are they mutually exclusive? What is going on with this case? Looking at the main competing theories. And then in the follow-up episodes, we will get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, and the more obscure, not talked about, and mind-shocking aspects of the case. But I just wanted to do the quick rundown with the various theories, which are, of course, the parents did it, an intruder did it, or Burke did it. Those are the primary theories, and we've gone over them a bit in the previous episodes, but this is a very, very focused look on these competing theories and the people behind them, namely Steve Thomas and Lou Smit, and we will also be examining their background, particularly Lou Smit's, because there is a lot of speculation regarding his motivations and his history. So we'll be taking a look at all of that. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like this podcast, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests, and depending on your tier, you could also be a guest on the podcast. If you are not getting notifications of the latest Mindshock episodes, you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock and manually peruse our ever-growing library and see the latest updates that way. Or conversely, if you make sure your device allows the YouTube notifications to come through, they should come through unless the issue is on YouTube's end, and there's definitely some consistency there. A lot of people reporting those issues across many, many channels. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so one of the most succinct write-ups I've found is actually on the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit, r/Jonbenet. This was posted by Aspidistra76 4 years ago. And it's a good write-up. Steve Thomas, Parents Did It, versus Lou Smit, Intruder Did It, versus currently fashionable Burke Did It. I'm not sure if it was just currently. I think people from the get-go suspected. All right, so here's the post. Which is harder to believe? Patsy, in a rage over bedwetting, threw her daughter against the tub and crushed her skull, thought she was dead, and staged a ransom/sexual assault scene because she panicked. The vaginal trauma was punishment for bedwetting. Or a pedophile entered the home while the family was at a dinner party, spent hours becoming familiar with the house, wrote a note, hid in the basement, took Jonbenet Ramsey with a stun gun, molested her, planning to take her out in a suitcase, but killed her when it was impossible to raise the suitcase out the window. Both scenarios are totally made up and are ludicrous. And I'm just going to drop in another Bruce Maguire theory here. Some of these are not mutually exclusive, and I've brought this up before. I tentatively titled it The Maguire Theory, where an intruder did do it, but the parents thought that Burke did it. And then that's why they staged it. That's why Patsy wrote the letter. That's why there are so many issues. Obviously, the letter is problematic, not just from the handwriting, but from its length, from its content, which suspiciously mirrors books in their bedroom, etc. So these theories are not mutually exclusive. We don't do black and white logical fallacies on Mindshock. There's some interconnectedness and overlapping that could occur and does occur in a lot of true crime cases. Did it occur here? I don't know. I'm not insinuating that. I'm just going over possibilities. Also, what I will be going over on future episodes is the possibility that Jonbenet was actually killed at the party they attended or shortly after the party, because there's a lot of inconsistencies with who was wearing what, when, how of that night. So whenever there are anomalies, I mean, everything from the lights that the neighbors reported on or off depending on the night. Anything that's out of the ordinary needs to be looked at. Because if something, there's a certain pattern, there's a certain routine. Whenever something is outside of the realm of the ordinary routine, it deserves a second look, particularly if the only time it was out of the ordinary or out of routine is at the time when a crime occurred. See, that's problematic. The coincidence theorists brush it all off. But if you're not a coincidence theorist, if you're capable of critical thinking, what some people consider conspiratorial thinking, but it's mainly critical thinking, deductive reasoning, the application of logic and reason itself to come up with different theories and deduce what could or could not have happened. So just quick aside there, but let's go back to the write-up here. We know there were many keys out there. No one had to use the window. Again, an issue with that. Yes, there were many keys out there, potentially dozens. However, if this particular individual did not have a key, he would use a window. So again, without knowing what happened, we don't know. We know Steve was wrong about, quote, careful placement of the favorite nightgown, end quote, by the body. It was stuck by static electricity to the blanket that the killer took out of the dryer. Patsy could very well have done it, but if so, she was a murderous, psychotic woman who fooled everyone her whole life and lied repeatedly with no remorse and in fact never loved her daughter. Again, no. That's not quite true either. Many people have crimes of passion, psychotic breaks, accident, under the influence, whatever. Many people kill their loved ones. They actually did love them. They just had, again, either emotional issues, mental health issues. More than one thing can be true at a time. Again, the mutual exclusivity claimed by many online commentators on true crime cases, they simply do not account for these black and white logical fallacies, which Mindshock does. An outsider could very well have done it and made it look like Patsy or John did it, if they knew something about them. They could have learned a lot by looking around the house for hours. All the low-life criminals, neighbors, and friends and acquaintances were exonerated by DNA testing, but were they? Did they test everyone in the world? No. And a further point here on this write-up, the DNA test itself, if it's faulty, I mean, I might have to do a dedicated episode just on the DNA. We've touched upon it in the past. But if it's a highly contaminated sample and the way that DNA testing is done, if you haven't checked out the Stephen Avery series on Mindshock, we did 2 episodes, DNA for Dummies 2. Check those out. A lot of this DNA testing is DNA testing is based on thresholds, estimations, extrapolations by faulty human technology. Now, faulty doesn't mean it's not going to give an accurate result. It means it's not 100%. So, again, as DNA testing becomes more and more advanced, perhaps there can be more to this, but at the moment, being exonerated by a DNA test doesn't necessarily really mean they were exonerated. All right, continuing on here, the stun gun theory is only a theory. The sex abuse evidence is not agreed upon by all the experts. The pineapple is not agreed upon either. The murder weapon is not agreed upon. They are just theories. Okay, good points there. Steve's main evidence for Patsy Did It appears to be her not changing to a new outfit that morning. He can't believe a woman with a closet full of designer clothes would wear the same thing twice. This is not evidence of a murder. It is his opinion. His other main issue is that the parents hired lawyers almost immediately and said they would cooperate with the police, but found ways to delay it. All of this is not evidence that they are guilty. Yeah, okay. If I had to choose, I'd choose Intruder Did It, but I think Smit was wrong about the stun gun and other details. I also note that at least Steve Thomas wrote tons of background details that no one else does, and the book is worth reading for that. What interests me right now is the issue of the pull-up diapers hanging out of the closet near Jonbenet Ramsey's bedroom. Yet she was found in underwear. If she was wetting the bed nightly as is claimed, why not put her in those every night? Right, she was asleep. They carried her up to bed. You know she's going to wet the bed. You put the pull-ups on her, not long johns over her underwear. These are some of the things that remain mysterious to me. Whoever did it, the parents are odd, and that is why the police focused on them. But the parents didn't act like killers, in my opinion. Yet the tabloids were getting direct leaks from the DA's office of all the police evidence and theories, so it was a window into what they thought happened. The mother's rage over bedwetting. I thought the tabloids made all that up, but according to Steve Thomas, it was all leaked police files. I can't imagine Burke is involved in any of this. Neither Smit nor Thomas even considered Burke a suspect. This is a third theory, of course, Burke did it. But if Burke did it, why was Patsy considered the murderer? Why did the grand jury mention child abuse? The Burke Did It theory is popular now only because of the CBS show, which outlined how Burke could have done it. That's not evidence of murder, it's a theory like all others. Unless there is more evidence found or someone confesses and their DNA matches, well, it will never be solved, will it? If Patsy did it, she is a clever, crafty murderess whose only error was not changing her outfit because she stayed up all night staging the scene and forgot. Yet, she showed no prior violence or neglect to her children, and don't all mothers who murder their children crack under pressure and confess? This was a religious woman. Again, not necessarily. I mean, there's so many variables here. And I think everyone can agree that this is probably an outlier case, regardless of who did it, just because of all the strange details that don't add up. Like every single theory seems to have unanswered questions and issues with it. So it's an outlier case no matter how you look at it, no matter who did it. So the other point I'd like to make is it conclusively known whether Patsy Ramsey actually changed into her night clothes, went to sleep, got up, changed back into the outfit from the previous night? See, if I don't know which theories allege what, that she never changed in the first place, or she did change, go to sleep, and then that was the closest outfit to her. I don't know if she left it wherever as she's going to bed. Unknown. If an intruder did it, they committed the perfect crime, framed the parents, took away all traces of their presence, and made zero mistakes. Except they left a ransom note and a dead child and never collect the money, so something went wrong with their plan. Still, they got away with it. And that's another point here, too. A lot of true crime, from aficionados to people who are just have passing interest in true crime, I've seen this time and time again with many different theories. I mean, in the Maura Murray case, one of the covered cases on Mindshock, a lot of people think that Maura Murray, theoretically, allegedly, driving up to New Hampshire, if it wasn't her, someone staging her vehicle would never do it that way. Well, no, not intentionally. It's weird. It's like a lot of these true crime commentators have never heard of Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. If there was a problem with the crime, and also these are all presuppositions on how experienced these criminals are, regardless of which true crime case you're looking at. There's different theories. If the alleged perpetrators could be highly intelligent and experienced or not. If they are not, that opens the door to more mistakes, more actions that wouldn't necessarily make sense if you're talking about experienced kidnappers, etc., or criminals of whatever crime you're looking at. So, is it possible there was an intruder? They were not very bright. Perhaps a previous construction worker who overheard either a housekeeper or someone talking about the bonus that John Ramsey got. Maybe they found some paperwork that wasn't put away properly. We don't know. It doesn't have to be the most highly intelligent individual, so things can go wrong with a plan. Particularly if they figure it's really easy to kidnap a child. I mean, maybe they've never seen Home Alone. Whatever the case, they think it's a lot easier than it's gonna be. Things go wrong. I mean, perhaps Burke does know more than he lets on. I mean, I don't know. In highly looking at human psychology in highly stressful situations, it's possible Burke has repressed memories from that night. I mean, that's highly traumatic for a child of his age. If he was not responsible and something else went down, possibly with a person who was a friend of the family or known to him. If a construction worker had maybe threatened him in the past or something of that nature and he was absolutely terrified, I mean, all the adult listeners out there, when you were a child, when you were extremely afraid, you might be too scared to tell your parents or the police about something. If it was that terrifying and that traumatic, I don't know. Every kid is different. Burke does seem like an unusual kid in the first place, so we really don't know. If Burke did it and the parents desperately covered it up and got him to lie about it all this time, well, how likely is it that he would never accidentally say something? How likely is it for parents to desecrate and cover up their cherished little girl's death to spare Burke punishment he would not even get since he is too young to be prosecuted? And that's another point that we hear brought up all the time. Well, Burke was so young anyway, why would they cover it all up? Well, there's a couple different reasons. One is just perceptions, because that would make them look like bad parents. So again, depending on their egos, again, I do not know the Ramseys. I don't know any of this information. But there are people out there, you could look at other true crime cases, they care about the way they're looked at by the public and the media, etc. If they really don't want to be looked at as the type of parents that brought up a child that could be involved in some kind of situation like this, that would make them look bad. And we do know, other than money, ego seems to really be the root cause of a lot of crimes. A lot of crimes. I mean, you could even make a case it supersedes money, depending on how you look at it, what parameters you're setting and examining all these cases. But yeah, it's either, what is it? It's either love, money, or ego. And love goes a little bit with the ego too. So, and so does money to a certain extent. So yeah, if they didn't want to be looked at that way, they would want to stage it as an intruder. Okay, the other thing is, how traumatic is it to have your child die? Would you be logical enough in that moment to think, well, Burke wouldn't be prosecuted anyway? Or would you be so emotional and traumatized, you're just thinking that you're not even considering that? It's not like you're pausing and reflecting, well, wait a second. Who gets tried for what, at which age? They might have not even considered it. If they had considered it, they probably would have thought, oh, well, he wouldn't be prosecuted anyway. But maybe they thought he'd be taken away from them for mental issues. That's another point, too, that I don't hear discussed too often. If they thought they'd put him in some kind, take him away from the parents because the parents might be seeming unfit to raise such a child, or a child with needs or whatever, they might have thought that they'd take Burke away from them, put him in some mental hospital or something for children. Who knows what they were thinking? The point is, you can't pretend that all people react to all things the same way, particularly under traumatic, emotional, stressful situations. And that's why all these points need to be carefully considered. This is why I have to be Intruder Did It, yet not the way Lou Smit outlined it. Like everyone else, he guessed at what caused the marks. Many others have said they do not look like stun gun marks. I also don't care about his experiment with climbing in the window. No one needs to use the broken window when the doors were unlocked. Plus, there were several keys in other people's possession. Surely someone came up with a more logical intruder scenario than he did, but I still think the killer is somewhere in his files. I can't see any mother staging a sex crime to save her skin after punishing a 6-year-old for bedwetting to such a degree that she kills her. Almost any scenario is more believable than this. And that's, again, an appeal to incredulity, logical fallacy. Also, we don't know that those were the exact circumstances. So Patsy Ramsey or John Ramsey could be guilty under different circumstances. And we don't know what the circumstances are. Of course, some theorize John Ramsey was abusing Jonbenet. Patsy didn't know, then she found out, or whatever the case may be, or she did know. I don't know. Something went wrong. Unless someone was there, even John Ramsey might not know exactly what happened, right? Depending on the situation. I don't know. It's pretty crazy. Some of the responses here, some by users since deleted, or have some interesting thoughts. There is no evidence of an intruder, whether through a window or an open door. None. Well, we do have those pry bar marks on a door frame, which I've gone over in previous episodes, although supposedly they were there prior to that night. No stun gun, nobody hung around that house for hours waiting around for them to go to bed. It doesn't matter whether you or anyone feels like somebody doesn't fit a profile. Feelings aren't evidence relevant to what was and was not uncovered that morning and beyond through investigation. You do not need to be a handwriting expert to look at the consistencies to Patsy's writing and the ransom note to tell off a straight visual she wrote the note. Nobody staged a sex crime, nobody. The glaring visual evidence that's real, regardless of anyone's belief, shows it was Patsy, and that unto itself negates the entire intruder theory. Well, not necessarily. Again, I'm not saying this is true in any way, but if we're going over all possible scenarios, is it beyond the realm of possibility that somebody was planning to kidnap Jonbenet Ramsey? Whether it was the Santa Claus that allegedly told her he was going to pay her a secret visit, whether it was somebody else. Again, John Ramsey was connected through his company with Lockheed Martin and some possible CIA top-level government connections. Is it possible someone was planning to intrude, to kidnap or do something else, but Patsy Ramsey killed Jonbenet by accident? Or Burke did it? So again, this is why we don't fall for logical fallacies. I'm not saying that that's a viable theory. I'm just saying if we're having all the theories on the table, we cannot exclude that definitively with the limited information available. There was a blow to the head rendering her unconscious. There was a period of time between the blow to the head and ultimate death. The garrote is not a garrote and wasn't used for staging. Simply looking at the cord and how it was fashioned and tied makes more sense as a device used to move, drag, pull, not strangle. That's actually kind of interesting. The thing that doesn't quite make sense is unless it was Burke, an adult would probably be able to move a child's body quite easily. But Burke might not have been able to, so that is interesting. The strangulation wasn't all at once. The cord was tied on one end and dragged upward from behind, which inadvertently tightened the cord and ultimately strangled her. Unless someone walked in on the sexual assault with the paint handle, then at least two people had zero idea that that was even a thing to begin with, which explains why it wasn't dealt with. The pineapple consumption took place after they returned, without a doubt. Therefore, the story that Jonbenet was sound asleep is a lie. Yes, it's speculated the entire incident occurred over pineapple, but that's just filling in the gaps. There isn't anything any of us have to fit that piece into the puzzle as a hard fact. She could have simply asked for a piece, been given a piece, and nothing else came of it. We can hear all three of them, regardless of what is specifically heard, on the enhanced 911 tape. That means their tale that Burke was asleep upstairs is a lie. What makes sense is that once the deed was done, in order to protect Burke from their likely assumption he'd be locked up for life or institutionalized, they irrationally united to come up with a scenario to protect Burke from that. That is not uncommon. This happens all the time. Somebody expletive up, somebody else comes to their aid to help them cover for it. The staging part makes sense only insofar as the presentation of a kidnapping. She was put in the wine cellar to be hidden. She had tape over her mouth after she was unconscious, as indicated by the brown fluid from her nose mouth beneath the tape. She was wrapped in the blanket and hidden, almost certainly with the intent of moving her out of the house to be, quote, discovered, end quote, dead, and the kidnappers followed through because they saw all the cops appear, and that went against the note's instructions. Only that plan backfired, and they had to discover her and disrupt the scene and evidence. The sexual assault was not part of the staging. The garrote wasn't a garrote and not part of the staging, nor to finish her off. So you have a 9-year-old who hit his sister, knocked her out to the point she appeared dead. Then you have several injuries on her body that suggest attempts to revive her. Poked and prodded to get a response. Also likely from a clueless 9-year-old who didn't know better. You have a cord tied to her neck, the other end with a handle, which is more reasonable as a pulling device, probably to drag her. You have evidence of vaginal penetration, evidence of wood splinter consistent with the same wood as the handle, and whichever came first is unknown. That's the assault on Jonbenet. Then you have her being covered up, put in the wine cellar on her back, loose bindings on the wrists, taped mouth. In my opinion, the nightgown was inadvertently clung to the blanket and wasn't placed there by a loving parent. That's horse expletive. A loving parent would have behaved much differently and faced the music one of their children expletive up got him help. Then more time passed while they figured out how to redirect the whole ordeal into a kidnapping. They did not intend for Jonbenet to be discovered or a kidnapper to change course and kill the money prize and leave her there instead due to the actual factual injuries and time frame required. They lost control of the scene when more cops appeared, and had a cop found her in the basement all bundled and tied up, the Ramseys would have been clear suspects. The only recourse to keep some semblance of control was for John Ramsey, who knew well before the 911 call she was there, to, quote, find her, end quote, and disrupt the scene to make it harder to explain his own contamination and confuse the way it looked. The way she was hidden makes this clear enough. The intent was to relocate her so she'd be discovered elsewhere. Because in the movies where foreign factions kidnap rich kids, the cops don't search the whole house. They tap some phones and leave, or hang out in the dining room and then leave. Would it have been hard to keep Burke quiet? Not at all. Threatening him with being locked away forever and not being able to play his games or with his trains, especially if he showed even a sliver of concern, would be enough to keep him in line. But to be sure, they got him out of the house as soon as possible to prevent any cops from access and questioning him. If you remove all the far-fetched theories and go with the basic facts, that's where it points, and the staging was all relevant to her having been killed by the kidnappers after the Ramseys called the cops and disobeyed, and she'd have been hidden to be moved later. Nobody staged a sexual assault. Nobody staged a garroting. Nobody staged any of that. That was all part of the actual assault on Jonbenet. It's entirely plausible neither John nor Patsy had a clue in hell at the time she'd also been sexually assaulted. They staged the kidnapping elements. The head injury and ultimate strangulation moving her is what they were knowingly covering up. So that's actually one of the best arguments for Burke Did It that I have seen thus far. So it postulates that the garrote wasn't really a garrote, and that some of these marks on Jonbenet were simply someone trying to revive her. Someone like a kid who doesn't really know how. Not a bad write-up. Not bad, especially when we consider that this was a plan gone wrong. No matter what happened, it seems like it would be a plan gone wrong unless someone's really trying to frame the Ramseys, which, again, that opens up other cans of worms there. But that was a very, very good write-up. Now, here's another interesting post from another user that I haven't seen addressed specifically. I can't shake my gut feeling that a female intruder committed the crime, probably someone close to or at least acquainted with the family. I think jealousy was the motive, either of Jonbenet herself or Patsy. Now, that is an unexplored option that I really haven't seen attention given to this theory that someone was jealous or someone wanted to hurt Patsy Ramsey. What better way than to attack her prize child, her beauty queen, her pride and joy? Interesting theory, and we'll be exploring other suspects and that theory even more in further episodes. Now, that would point to, again, did Patsy really write the note? Now, if someone is framing them, are they going to write the note in Patsy's handwriting? If this is someone close to the family with access to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting, what would prevent them from writing a ransom note in Patsy's handwriting, a ridiculous ransom note, to make it look like the parents are covering this whole thing up to make them look guilty? Now, to some, this would seem like 3D chess, but again, if we don't know who the perpetrators are, how would we know what mental level they are operating on? We don't. And it's not really that outlandish. I mean, regarding the Kurt Cobain case, which I just covered on Mindshock, if you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's quite interesting. Some believe, due to the notes, the handwriting practice notes found in Courtney Love's backpack that she left at her lawyer, Carol's house, that those were practice notes. She was practicing writing in Kurt Cobain's handwriting. And the alleged suicide note found in the greenhouse with Kurt Cobain that might have been written by Courtney Love. So is it completely out of the realm of possibility that someone would stage the ransom note and write it in Patsy Ramsey's handwriting? And that's why so many handwriting experts are confused. Because it's not 100% exactly her handwriting, but it's very similar. Someone responded to this post, I personally do not believe a woman assaulted and murdered Jonbenet Ramsey, but there is definite precedent for it. I do strongly suspect there is a female involved by some means, though. Another interesting response here. Still, Patsy did it because it's the most likely scenario based on child abuse death statistics, and the evidence points to her. And I don't see Burke as a violent child. Socially withdrawn and awkward, yes, but not a killer. I recently watched a heartbreaking documentary about a 12-year-old boy who supposedly killed his 3-year-old brother by bashing his head into the corner of a bookshelf repeatedly. He was sentenced to 7 years after confessing to the crime, but what struck me was the ending of the movie. There was strong evidence suggesting the mom actually killed the kid. She got no time in prison. Now, this is the Fernandez case, Christian Fernandez. And perhaps if there's interest, I'll do a dedicated episode on it. Obviously heartbreaking in every sense of the word, particularly if the mom actually did it. The boy gave a false confession and even rehearsed it in front of the cameras when the interrogator left the room. The mother had waited 8 hours to seek medical treatment for the dying child while doing Google searches for terms like coma and child not breathing and posh spice. Okay. Anyway, the little boy who was arrested for the crime came across as distant and dead inside, much like Burke did in his child psychologist interviews. Kids who witness murder and abuse often exhibit odd behaviors themselves for many reasons: sadness at losing a sibling, fear of being punished themselves, fear of losing their parents to the justice system if they tell, etc. Burke's odd behavior is more likely to be a product of his upbringing than some inborn psychopathic condition. Also, I think it's fair to assume Burke was heavily coached by parents and lawyers before his interviews with the psychologist. That could account for his not recognizing the pineapple and other red flag behaviors. Regarding Kolar's theory, if Burke was the one who had toileting issues, it might look more suspicious to me. But Jonbenet also had similar problems, which points to abuse of both children. Could the head wound have been an accident on Burke's part? Absolutely, but I don't think he hit her on purpose, even with the intention of just hurting her. And I certainly don't buy that he tied the ligature and wrote the ransom note. Too long didn't read. Burke is probably weird because he was raised in a house of abuse and or neglect. He may know what happened to his sister, but probably didn't take part in it based on the rarity of siblings killing siblings versus parents killing their children. And that is interesting to note. Statistically, those are very fair points. But again, if this is an outlier case, which it appears to be, that's not necessarily. If you're taking bets, yes, you could. That might be a smart bet, but that doesn't mean that's what happened in this particular case. So just one quick point, that the pineapple, the timeline of the pineapple, which I think is interesting. Here's a few different posts on it. What's not agreed upon about the pineapple? She had dinner at the Whites. The Whites did not have pineapple. Her meal from the Whites was hours beyond the pineapple in her digestive tract. There was a bowl of pineapple on the table in the house. Based on where the food was in her digestive tract, the only place she could have had the pineapple was at her home. Even if digestion varies from person to person, the pineapple came after her dinner for sure. She only had access to pineapple after her dinner in the Ramsey home. Her body expired with the pineapple in the proximal part of her small intestine just past the stomach. So it was in there for some time, but not that long. I don't understand why the pineapple is disregarded so easily. It is the only piece of evidence that Jonbenet left behind that could not be planted, manipulated, staged, or spin-doctored, and it blows the Ramseys' testimony straight out of the water. The response here, I've seen disagreement about the pineapple in the books I've read. Some said it could be vegetable or fruit, but looked like pineapple. Some said it was undigested pineapple that had rind on it, and so did the pieces in the bowl. One said it was fruit cocktail. To me, this is disagreement. Another poster chimed in, because the pineapple is no longer just pineapple. The supplemental autopsy report includes pineapple, green grapes, grape skin, grape pulp, and cherries, commonly associated with fruit cocktail. It's also interesting to see if those fruits were distinguished from each other, or if that could be determined. So were they all eaten at the same time or not? The whites have never said they did not serve pineapple. They said they did not remember. According to Steve Thomas, there were several post-autopsy reports generated about a year after Jonbenet Ramsey, and he chose to include only one for his book. So is it possible that the whites served some kind of fruit cocktail that might have included pineapple? Is it possible that Burke ate pineapple exclusively himself, and Jonbenet was either dead before she even got to the house, if she died at the Whites, if she died en route, if she died shortly after, or if she died after Burke ate the pineapple but was never given a piece of pineapple? We really don't know without a more definitive autopsy, because, again, there seems to be a lot of unanswered questions regarding almost every aspect of this case, which is what makes it so difficult. And I think the variable of luck has to play in here too, because if the Ramseys did it, if the parents did it, and all of this contamination and funny business went on, did they not think to clean up the pineapple, or were they just that emotional or distraught? Were they just so focused on concocting this intruder kidnapper theory, and then when it all went wrong, they had to make adjustments, so they just couldn't be bothered with the pineapple? I mean, it's tough. It's really tough to understand. Another response here, there's evidence we don't know about, and none of the theories seem to fit together perfectly. Anyone on Reddit who's absolutely certain can't be. The BPD and DA made some crucial mistakes that I don't think can ever be overcome. Here are my thoughts. Case for Intruder Did It. Parents don't seem to fit the profile, no known abuse in their past. If they were responsible, it would assume they went from 0 to 100 on one fateful night. It seems out of character from what we've learned about them. Many mistakes were made, including not sealing off the home immediately, not getting the exact time of death by getting fluid from her eye, allowing John Ramsey to search the home with a friend, moving the body again after she was brought upstairs. Many think that the Ramseys should have done more to help the police, but I'm sure their lawyers reiterated that the police were incompetent. Look at the mistakes that were made, and because the case was high profile, looking to close the case quickly by indicting the family. If they truly thought the police were completely incompetent and trying to pin it on them, I can see their hesitation to work with them. Now, that is an absolutely excellent point that I don't see brought up enough. Can you make a case for the incompetence of the Boulder Police Department? If you can, and again, these people are not... these people are well-off people. They probably know how the police operate. Similarly, on both ends of the spectrum, you have extremely rich people might know how the police operate and how to identify incompetent police trying to close cases quickly and how they focus in on family members. Similarly, you might have people more around the poverty line and below who know how police operate in their ways. It seems like that middle group, the middle class, so to speak, are the ones who think that police are infallible, they're always out for the truth, and all of these things. So if you know the police are incompetent just by the way you handle the scene, if your lawyers are telling you the police are incompetent, how does that affect your quote-unquote cooperation? And these are just things to think about. I'm not saying one way or the other. This is Mindshock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Case for Ramseys Did It. Many experts seem close to certain that Patsy wrote the ransom note. It's more likely than not she wrote the letter, according to certain experts. There is also a deposition where Patsy is shown, I believe, Jonbenet's baby book, and they ask her if that's her handwriting. This is a sample of writing that appears to more closely match the ransom letter, and she replies that it isn't her writing, which one would think is an obvious untruth. Both John and Burke changed their story. Initially, John Ramsey said she was up when they arrived home. John said he read to her. Burke said she walked up the stairs from the car. Later, the story was that she was asleep the entire time. That is another interesting point. We've gone over that. I think a lot of people don't focus on that. There's some weirdness there. Fibers from Patsy's sweater were found on the tape and tied in the garret. John Andrew Ramsey was quoted as saying, "It had to be an inside job because the layout of the house is confusing. The wine cellar she was found in wasn't easy to find." Also, quite an interesting statement. It seems unlikely that an intruder not only felt comfortable enough to stay in the house for hours before they arrived from the Whites, but also stayed in the house for at least an hour after the assault began, as the time frame from head injury to strangulation was 45 minutes to 2 hours. They also have enough time to write a lengthy ransom note, including a practice note, while in the house. In other instances where children have been taken from their homes, the intruder leaves immediately with the child, example Polly Klaas, Elizabeth Smart, etc. It's not impossible, but just seems unlikely. This intruder is very neat, leaves no trace of how they entered, puts the pad and Sharpie back exactly where they found it. They grab paper from Patsy's pad, and they know enough to take paper from the back of the notebook and not the front. Wipe her body down after the assault. Again, it wasn't in a hurry. Again, seems very unlikely. I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but there is still chance it could be Intruder Did It. Someone may have committed the perfect crime. If it was Intruder Did It, there's no way it was a random stranger. This person knew the house layout, bonus amount, that the Ramseys often used the back staircase, not the front, and one of them was from the south, etc. Also, if it was an intruder, this person was not your average criminal, which makes it easy to eliminate the housekeeper's husband or some random dumb person that walked by. The reading level of the ransom note is high. I think the two misspelled words were put there intentionally, as more sophisticated words like attaché, countermeasures, and the punctuation on the letter were nearly perfect. This was someone who was educated for sure. People also dug up cases where mothers and grandmothers did kill their children over bedwetting or toilet issues, which is bizarre, and they also tried to cover it up. So people also chimed in whether or not Jonbenet Ramsey wet the bed that particular night. A response here: in the bedwetting rage scenario, she did. The sheets were gone. There was bedding in the washer or dryer. All the pictures of her bed show it was stripped of sheets with or without the comforter laid partly on it. Of course, she died before morning came. Who removed the sheets and when, if she was taken from her bed in the night and killed? Perhaps all those photos were taken days later, not by the first responders. I am not okay with child abuse of any kind, but blaming the child for something the parent caused by rough or careless training is inexcusable. If Patsy did kill her over bedwetting, she is mentally ill, and as I said before, nothing else in her life would point to that kind of cruelty. It bothers me that police will assume the worst every time, that every mother would be capable of murderous rage. It's not true. Certainly, Patsy addressed this when she said, as a stage 4 cancer survivor, a wet bed was nothing to her in the scheme of things. Just because it's happened with other parents who are severely mentally ill is not a reason to assume Patsy sunk to that level of child abuse when there was no hint of cruelty to her children before. A response: Ramsey house crime scene photos. There are a few different sets. In the earliest set, when they still thought it was kidnapping, the Beauty and the Beast sheets are still on the bed. I think you may have only seen the second set where they've already stripped the bed and started collecting evidence. There's a third set along with the video of the nearly empty house. Which is that's actually very interesting. Another response here. One thing that's bothered me in the first photos of the bed with sheets, the blankets are pulled down and the pink top she was wearing in the Christmas photos is on the bed. So let's say it's true they brought her up, read a story to a sleeping child. Why was she not dressed in her same PJs? Why would they leave the top of the bed when just moving it to replace it with the sleeping child? I know they were messy, but the shirt being on the bed doesn't make sense to me in the story they told. Do we leave dirty laundry on the bed right there and still sleep with it there? Interesting point. Clearly she had changed clothes from Christmas morning to party wear, and then the party wear was removed for bedtime wear. Since we have a basis for her wearing the pink PJs, part of it was on the bed where she slept, and if I recall, the bottoms were in the bathroom, so what was she wearing for bed this night? If neither of those garments had urine on them, then we know she didn't wet the bed wearing those. So what was the logic behind what she was wearing when she was assaulted? It's not jiving, but I'm not sure. Yeah, there's some unanswered questions for sure regarding that, as well as regarding many other issues. Another response here. There are so many ridiculous, sarcastic phrases in the ransom note. I used to think the case could be solved from that long ransom note alone. Why wasn't it? But I was thinking Patsy lived for another 10 years after the death of Jonbenet Ramsey. I wonder if people ever started talking about some of these silly things in the note, if she went along with it and agreed how stupid, or felt uncomfortable and changed the subject. What would one do? She would have to be a good actress to joke about phrases she herself made up. What do you think? I don't know. Some people believe John Ramsey was telling her what to write, but again, we really don't know. There are some hidden clues in the ransom note that I will be going over. So yeah, that's all really bizarre. So supposedly the crime scene photos that are closest to the time of the crime do not show wet or urine-stained bed sheets. Now, of course, if Patsy Ramsey were guilty and she wanted to cover that up, I mean, I suppose they could have switched the sheets out. I don't know. Another response here. There's no evidence of toileting rage, which is why it enrages me to see the police or DA's obsession with it as a theory. It reminds me of when I was 6 years old and blamed for putting salt in a sugar jar. First, I couldn't reach it. Second, I had no interest in such an act. Third, I was shocked to be blamed for something I didn't do, and what's more, something stupid I would never think of. It was a theory developed out of whole cloth, pinned on a child because the adult who did it was too embarrassed to admit it. It could have been my brother or sister, yet they never admitted it. I am still puzzled about things like that. I bet all of you here were blamed for something you would never have even thought of doing. I mean, I wasn't punished for it, just scolded and told to stop lying. If the Ramseys are innocent, what must it have been like to be grilled relentlessly? All right, so let's do a quick breakdown of the intruder theory if the intruder were a burglar. Now, this write-up is from JonbenetRamsey.pbworks.com. They have a lot of write-ups on the case and documentation. A really good source for anyone researching this case online. Overview. The main idea behind the theory is connected with a burglary that went wrong. It explains every evidence of the crime known to the author without any amount of staging in place. It uses its own analysis of ransom note based on professional and amateur analysis used primarily in the Ramseys Did It theories. The key aspect of this theory is an idea that the burglar had some common past with the Ramsey family, the most possible with the father, not excluding his wife. It uses the most of evidence straightforward and can be seen not only as a theory of the crime, but also as a theory explaining the idea behind the staging, no matter who did it. It excludes more or less the possibility of some tragedy in the middle of the night behind some crazy staging of parents. It uses its own reasons for leaving of the ransom note in the house. The weakest point of this theory is an amount of knowledge regarding plans of the Ramseys. Versions. There are many versions and variants of this theory. They differ in reasons of the burglary surroundings of the crime. All basic versions are directly using an idea of the burglar as a person who has committed the murder with the possible help of some other persons not present at the crime scene. Versions not inspected by the author of the theory and a further using an idea of additional persons who know about the planned burglary and having killed Jonbenet before the staging to blame the burglar for the murder, or are staging the crime on some possible burglar using their own reasons for this. Important distinction. Personality. Personalities used in this theory are mostly on the analysis of the ransom note and are widened using additional evidence and information. The feedback loop analysis was used to get a better understanding of the ransom note and evidence left in the house. Key characteristic of the intruder: self-confidence, used to working alone, ability to take hard decisions on the fly, had little time to handle the kidnapping, out of Boulder, working out of Christmas holidays, had a safe place to keep the girl with help of some additional persons, family, or very close friends, knew both parents or at least John with some information about his wife. It is highly possible he knew their wedding date because there is no evidence he knew Jonbenet's name. It is possible they had not met in the past 10 to 15 years. Ransom note looks like a way to grab contact with John, with money from kidnapping being only some part of this contact. Ransom note can be read as a ransom letter, exhibit letter, or threatening letter. Exhibit letter can be connected with lots of time spent with uneducated people, foreign countries, or missions. He was not afraid of prison for the kidnapping. This idea was used to explain one of possible ways to spend the ransom money in version 2 of the theory. Timeline: 5 to 6 p.m., Ramseys left for the Christmas party at the Whites. 7 p.m., intruder breaks into the house. Between 7 and 9 p.m., the intruder searches the house. Between 9 and 10 p.m., the intruder writes the first ransom note and starts the second one. 10 p.m., the Ramseys come back home. Intruder hides in the cellar. Between 10 and 10:40 p.m., the Ramseys go to sleep. Intruder seeks an escape way. 10:40 to 1 a.m., on the 26th, the intruder searches the basement. At 1 a.m., intruder kidnaps Jonbenet from her room. Approximately 1 a.m., and around that time, the intruder returns to get outdoor clothes from Jonbenet's room. The rest of them are probably on the first floor. There's a head injury and a scream reported by some neighbors. Between 1 and 2 a.m., agony and strangulation of Jonbenet Ramsey. Between 2 and 3 a.m., removing all evidences of burglary in the basement. 5:30 a.m., parents wake. Burglary. There is a lot of evidence of burglary in the house. The most important are suitcase near the train room window, a fresh pack of panties used in the post-mortem dressing, an amount of money used in the ransom note. All items used or left in the crime are usable in burglary. This was not a typical burglary to steal some silver plates from the house. Family back home. At the time the ransom note was finished, at least in one full set with additional pages used in the process, intruder was not disturbed to the point of making tea and getting some food for himself. Because of the flashlight left in the house, he was probably surprised hearing the car, and because of that, he was searching for an escape route in the basement, the train room window, and some place to hide. Evidence of him hiding in the remaining part of the elevator. Kidnapping. He was waiting a long time to be sure everyone was sleeping. He was probably not aware of Jonbenet eating something in the middle of the night, probably around midnight. Murder. After kidnapping of Jonbenet in her pajama or nightgown, he needed to dress her before going out with her. He locked the door of the wine cellar, went back to get some clothes for her. He was probably walking around the house with a bat in his hand. The most probable situation is Jonbenet trying to run away from a dark wine cellar and him pushing her on the bat, leaning against the wall, or hitting her fast and strong with it to stop her. With him unaware of a critical hit on her head, rest of evidence is connected with him raging because of her pretending to be dead and with later checkings of how severe her condition is. After strangulation, he was moving in the basement, holding her in his hands to wrap her in the blankets and hide the body. His personality more or less excludes trying to kidnap the body from the house using the basement window. He would escape with the body using the door, as he did at the end. Ramsey's morning. This theory uses a lot of analysis from the Patty Ramsey Did It theories regarding the morning of the Ramseys, analysis of 911 call and interviews of parents. The version currently in development is using an idea that parents were searching for Jonbenet in the morning actively in the house. It is possible that a ransom note was found after seeing a body of Jonbenet. Taking into consideration a typical parental behavior in such situations, it can be supposed that John Ramsey was searching outside, calling for Jonbenet, and Patsy Ramsey was searching the house. In such situation, the alarmed neighbors could check the house in the morning, and it is possible that some evidence of an intruder that was found is connected with one or even two neighbors checking the house at the time of finding of ransom note. Marks on the tree suggest someone checking Jonbenet's rooms, and high-tech footprint can be connected with checking the basement in the morning by someone. It is very probable that the enhanced 911 call is made using report of one of such persons. Burke in the theory, because of many psychological inconsistencies in interviews, reports and official statements of many part of the investigation, this theory is using an idea, which is not approved by anyone, that Burke was very active in the middle of the night and at least some part of his activity was later told to his parents. Because of 21 years of investigation, author assumes Burke made a confession with everything he did in the night. This theory uses an idea that Jonbenet wanted to drink something and she asked Burke for help. This happened just after the parents went to sleep. Jonbenet was calling Burke for help from inside of the wine cellar, and he was searching for her after the kidnap. He was sleeping lightly because of not being able to find Jonbenet, and when his mother went through his room in the morning, he was checking the basement, hearing rumors about Jonbenet, or later when the police were in the house. It is also possible he was helping to find Jonbenet in the morning. This part is not important in the theory, but it explains some part of his police interviews and later information about him. Okay, so very interesting. Obviously, there was nothing extremely valuable reported missing as if in a burglary, but there's a few issues here. There were over 100 burglaries in the neighborhood the month before Jonbenet's murder. That's a lot. This was in a 48 Hours report in 2005. Private detectives John San Augustine and Ollie Gray both learned that in months before Jonbenet's murder, there were more than 100 burglaries in the neighborhood. So immediately, it wouldn't be that strange that someone would possibly attempt to burglarize a home around Christmas time when there might be some expensive gifts in the house. So again, would they have taken more of the... I mean, I don't know. There's obviously a lot of problems with a lot of theories. But in general, the premise that there could have theoretically possibly been a burglary, whether or not it involved Jonbenet's death or not, that's on the table. So there was also a press release, January 23rd, 1997, by the Boulder Police Department. Residents reminded to lock doors and windows at night. Boulder police are advising residents to be certain they lock their doors following a rash of nighttime burglaries which appear to be related. The burglaries date back to December 12th, 1996, and the most recent report was on December 25th, 1996. So there's common information regarding many of these incidents. So, according to Detective Sergeant Doyle Thomas, head of property crime investigations, quote, the suspect or suspects enter homes through open doors between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m., usually while residents are home sleeping, end quote. The suspect takes small, easy-to-transport items such as cash, jewelry, compact discs, and credit cards. The suspect or suspects does not have contact with anyone in the house and essentially sneaks in and out through open doors. Since no one in the house actually sees the burglar, we have no suspect descriptions. Okay, very, very interesting. So what would happen if the burglars are disturbed by a child, possibly out in the middle of the night, getting a midnight snack? Okay, so Lou Smit's theory is that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. Detective Lou Smit, who had access to all of the case materials up until his resignation, has stated, quote, I believe that the killer had started out with a kidnapping in mind. I believe that he was going to take her out of the house. There is some evidence to suggest that he did perhaps try to put her in a suitcase. Perhaps he couldn't get the suitcase in the window and then get out of the window himself. Perhaps he got into the window and couldn't pull the suitcase out after him. So I don't know why he suddenly went to the basement room, fashioned a garret from something that was right there in plain sight, and brutally murdered Jonbenet. Perhaps she knew him. Perhaps she screamed. Something triggered this man to kill Jonbenet in a very brutal fashion. And he said that on Larry King Live, May 28, 2001. One argues that this is the work of adolescents who mistakenly thought they could make some easy money. The language of the ransom note and numerous references to movie lines are used to support this claim, which is interesting. Or that these are inexperienced perps, that way they've only seen movies or maybe read books about elaborate kidnappings, and that's why the ransom note is the way that it is. Very weird. Alright, so let's go back to Reddit for a moment. This is from the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit, titled As Such. Suspicious pattern of disturbances at external windows and doors. A number of external windows and doors of the Ramsey residence showed disturbances of various kinds that is consistent with the theory that an intruder was looking for various entry points to the house before finally finding one. These will be outlined below, referencing Boulder Police Department reports and crime scene photos where available. Northeast basement bathroom window. Boulder Police Report reference number 1 through 59 states northeast basement bath. 2 areas on the bottom frame were clear of dust. The impressions were consistent with the application of fingers to the area. The associated area inside the residence showed smudge marks on both walls, above and just to the south of the toilet. A piece of garland similar to that found in the wine cellar was found stuck to the wall in the east impression. Note, garland was also found entangled in Jonbenet's hair. Interesting. Crime scene photo 235 shows the exterior position of the window from a distance, on the right in the picture. 237 is closer, and 241 below is a close-up that clearly shows a disturbance of the dust in a pattern that would be consistent with the application of fingers to the area per the Boulder Police Department report. Under questioning from Lou Smit, John Ramsey stated that this area of the house was, quote, kind of a deserted area of the house. We never got back there, end quote, and is not somewhere the children would play. He considered the dust disturbance around the window to be odd. Solarium door. Boulder Police Department report reference number 1 to 59 states solarium door facing south. Fresh pry mark damage near the deadbolt. Appeared to be 2 or 3 separate and distinct areas of attack. The missing wood chips were not located in the vicinity of the door. John Ramsey noted the disturbance when shown crime scene photos of the door, not publicly available, and considered it odd but offered a possible innocent explanation. It could have been made by somebody closing the door with the deadbolt open. If he was involved in his daughter's death and cover-up, intent on blaming it on an intruder, would he really be offering up an innocent explanation for signs of attempted forced entry? And we'll get back to that in a moment. Unless he's playing 3D chess and he wants to be able to point to his statements there and see, look, I'm not trying to cover it up.
South rear residence door. Boulder Police Department report reference number 159 states, south rear residence door northwest of the grate. The exterior screen door appeared to have damage in the area of the handle lock, consistent with the door being forced open with the lock engaged. It looked like force supplied to the lock mechanism came from inside out. No pry marks on exterior. In her book, Woodward notes that a family friend had observed damage to this lock sometime before Christmas, but there is no indication as to whether there were both recent and older pry marks. There are no publicly available close-up crime scene photos of this damage. The picture below shows the door from a distance. The metal grate is to the right of the door. Another interesting point when dissecting all this information, perhaps there were if there was an attempted burglary within 1 to several days prior to Christmas, does that explain, how do we know these took place exactly that night? Could this damage and these marks and disturbances, could they have been made a night before? I mean, according to these police reports, there's lots of burglaries going on in the area. So, again, just something to think about. Broken basement window under metal grate. This is one of the best known and most controversial parts of the Ramsey house, with the most prominent intruder theorist, the late veteran detective Lou Smit, claiming that this was the entry and exit point for an intruder. As quoted in Paula Woodward's book, We Have Your Daughter, Boulder Police Department report reference number 1-59 is very brief on this area and does not mention any disturbances. Metal grate below the broken basement window, directly under the grate, were observed leaves and other exterior debris. However, looking at the crime scene photos of this area, this is clearly a disturbance of dust and debris in front of the center window, which was the broken window. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's some disturbance there. Summary overview. I have added the disturbance locations referred to above to an architectural drawing by Carol Nolan from We Have Your Daughter. So here we have, around the perimeter of the house, there are multiple possible disturbances. So we have dust disturbances, damage to handle locks on exterior screen doors, dust disturbances outside the basement bathroom window, and then pry marks on the sunroom door on the other side of the house. So is this one or more individuals circling the house looking to gain entry? And of course, this would not include all of the people that had copies of keys to the house, but again, does this have nothing to do with Jonbenet's murder? Conclusion, there is obviously no smoking gun here pointing to an intruder, but the evidence is consistent with an intruder seeking various entry points into the house. It is possible that one or two of the disturbances, particularly to those relating to the doors, may have been from a previous unsuccessful attempt to gain entry into the house before the night of the 25th into the 26th of December, which is an excellent point. So let's look at some more intricacies here. In the Lifetime movie, Who Killed Jonbenet Ramsey, Priscilla White tells Fleet, reading the newspaper, that Patsy is telling the police a door may have been a point of entry for an intruder, but Priscilla remembers Patsy telling her that the damage to the door was made by John Ramsey trying to enter the house without keys before the murder. So Patsy knew how the damage to the door was made, which is interesting. And supposedly this came from the police report of Barb Fernie and not Priscilla White, although it was portrayed as Priscilla White in this Lifetime movie. Other people chiming in here refer to possibly these disturbances being made by a gardener raking leaves or pulling leaves out of window wells, etc. However, counterpoint is supposedly these were fresh disturbances. And of course, how fresh, we don't know. So, it is Mindshock time. So this was, of course, all circumstantial. So now let's get into the crazy Mindshocks that most people are here for. September 16th, 1997. Boulder police. So this was Tuesday, September 16th, 1997. Boulder police are searching for an unidentified male who sexually assaulted a 14-year-old Boulder girl. The man entered the girl's home through a second-story door of the master bedroom, according to the police report. The girl's mother may have interrupted the attack when she went to check on her daughter. The girl was taken to Boulder Community Hospital. So, we have record here of an intruder. The mother's description: intruder wore black clothing, wore a baseball cap backwards, about 5'7", between 20 and 30 years old, blonde hair, angular thin face, and a jawline that really stood out. Now, so we have a history, we have historical reference now that around that year, so this was of course after Jonbenet's death, within a year, there's an intruder in Boulder. Now, what could be more mind-shocking than that? How about this? This girl went to the same dance studio as Jonbenet Ramsey the previous fall. Mind-shocking. Apparently, he knew the girl's name. So, this is a post from Web Sleuths. Boulder intruder attacked girl. Tonight on MSNBC's Ramsey documentary, I heard former FBI profiler Greg McCrary discount the likelihood of an intruder on the grounds that there was no pattern of intruders molesting young girls inside their own homes in the Denver-Boulder area at the time. He's flat wrong. In fact, there was just such an intruder in Boulder 10 months after the murder of Jonbenet. In September 97, an intruder tried to molest a 12-year-old girl in Boulder as she slept inside her own home. The intruder snuck in a back door before the family set the burglar alarm that night. He hid in the basement for hours, until 3 a.m. when he crept upstairs and entered the girl's second-floor bedroom. He spoke the girl's name, although she didn't recognize him. He must have been stalking her, and he was willing to take great risks inside her own home. He actually got in bed with her. Luckily, her mother woke up, walked down the hall, and maced him. He fled out a window and jumped to the ground. He hasn't been caught. This 1997 home invasion was never reported in the newspaper, but high-risk home invasions do happen. Although there are some similarities to the intruder theory in the Ramsey case, the modus operandi of the 97 Boulder intruder is different than the murder of Jonbenet. In the 97 case, there was no stun gun, no duct tape, no cord, no attempt to take her from the bedroom. Intruder threatened to bash her head in if she screamed. Her mother was alerted by some rustling sound. So good for her mother for being a light sleeper or possibly having some kind of motherly intuition, because if supposedly there was no scream, she only heard rustling sound. The MO of the Boulder police, however, was similar to the Ramsey case. Their investigation was indifferent. The family had to beg detectives to investigate more thoroughly. This case may have nothing to do with the Ramsey case, but it does show that an intruder molester can go so far as to hide for hours inside a home and try to molest a girl even with her parents in the house. The intruder in the 97 case was just as daring and determined as an intruder would have had to be in the Ramsey case. So here's the thing, though. The stack of coincidences grows ever higher, because we're not just talking about an intruder willing to wait hours and hours hiding inside a home, but in the same town. And not only that, but a girl who happened to go to the same dance studio as Jonbenet Ramsey. Now, I'm sure Jonbenet's dance studio didn't only have 2 or 3 people, but it probably didn't have thousands or tens of thousands of people either. So is it possible it's a coincidence? Sure. Is it possible that this guy had something to do with the Jonbenet Ramsey case? Possibly, possibly not. But it's very, very curious how this is not really touched upon. People who immediately discount the intruder theory, just they use these appeal to incredulity logical fallacies where it would just be too unlikely to hide in the home for so many hours. And of course, that's not necessarily how it happened. If the intruder was interrupted by the Ramseys coming home and couldn't get out in time, he might have been hiding until he could. Lots of different possibilities. And also the differences in MO could also be, this is a, that's weird. It says 12-year-old in some instances. In other instances, it says 14-year-old. But regardless, a 12 to 14-year-old is not a 6-year-old. It's a lot difficult to remove a 12 to 14-year-old quickly, silently, with less hassle than a 6-year-old who's obviously much smaller. So if it is the same person, which it might not be, but they wouldn't necessarily have the same MO. So someone posted this as well regarding the 97 Boulder intruder. I obtained the Boulder police report on the intruder who sexually assaulted a girl in her bedroom in the middle of the night while her mother was asleep in the next room. To preserve their privacy, I won't use their names. On September 13th to 14th, 1997, an intruder got into a Boulder home occupied by a mother and daughter. The father was out of town when the crime occurred. The girl was 14 years old. There was no sign of a forcible break-in. It's unclear how the intruder got in, but he may have entered through a back door that was unlocked before the mother went to bed that night. The intruder apparently snuck in and hid in the house for several hours, waiting until 3 a.m., coincidentally the witching hour, before going to the girl's bedroom. He wore black clothing, knew the girl's name, and knew his way around the house in the dark. The house had motion detectors and an alarm system which were set at 11 p.m., but he didn't set off the alarm. So that's really creepy. So he had either been stalking the place out, possibly he might have had been in the house multiple times before. That is really, really scary. The mother and daughter didn't recognize the man, but thought he may have been 20 to 30 years old. The girl described the suspect as having white skin and blonde hair sticking out from underneath a baseball cap, which he wore backwards. He left little forensic evidence. A couple of unidentified Latin fingerprints were obtained. The family believes that the suspect is someone who is good at sneaking into people's homes. They think the suspect snuck into the home during the day and hid in the house. The family believe that the suspect may have been the same suspect as in the Jonbenet Ramsey murder. They believe the MO of the suspect was similar to that in the Ramsey case. The case has some parallels to the Ramsey case, but also significant differences. In the 97 case, the intruder was threatening, but he didn't inflict any bodily injuries. He didn't appear to have any weapons. He didn't try to remove the girl from her room. The 97 intruder didn't rape the girl. He penetrated her digitally and licked her. He stated that oral sex was his objective. He didn't have his pants down. He left no semen. He spent 3 to 5 minutes with the victim before he was interrupted. He woke the victim at about 3 a.m. by tapping her on the shoulder and placing his hand over her mouth. He spoke these phrases: "I'm not here to hurt you. If you scream, I will hurt you. If I was here to hurt, I would have knocked you out." The police report says the girl believed that the male was old by the way he spoke, but described him as in his 20s by the way he dressed. She noted that his baseball cap was dark blue or black with a small baseball player on the back of the hat. The report continues, the male placed his hand over her mouth and spoke to her, telling her not to scream. She pushed the male away from her, and the male called her by name and told her to stop moving. She described the male as getting really mad. He pulled her underwear to one side. The mother describes herself as an extremely light sleeper. She heard rustling noises and whispers, so she heard him whispering. That's crazy. She called out to her daughter, but when her daughter didn't reply, the mother grabbed a can of mace. So she's prepared and approached the door of her daughter's room. At that moment, the intruder bolted out of the girl's room, ran into the mom's bedroom, went through French doors onto a landing, and jumped from the second floor to the ground. He hasn't been identified. The family was dissatisfied with the quality of police work. The family had to request that the police fingerprint the house more thoroughly. Linda Arndt was in charge. Tom Wickman, Tom Trujillo, and other detectives also worked on the case. The police report mentions a possibly related case to the Tanta Moorhead Circle area of Boulder a couple months before the 97 intrusion. So if this guy is active, I mean, that's only a couple months after December and then a couple months later in September. So the other thing that's kind of bizarre is in Dallas News actually has an article here. August 1st, 2000. Police chief doubts same person killed Ramsey, attacked teen girl. 9 months after the slaying of Jonbenet Ramsey, a girl who attended the same dance studio as the young beauty queen and lived just 2 miles away was assaulted in her bed by an intruder while her mother slept nearby. That crime, detailed in Boulder police reports, has common threads with the Ramseys' theory that their 6-year-old daughter was attacked by someone who hid in their home on Christmas night 1996. Key players in the Ramsey drama, including the prosecutors who led a fruitless grand jury probe into Jonbenet's slaying, learned of the September 97 incident only last week. So this is now the year 2000, so it takes 3 years for them to know about this. Does this sound like a well-run department? Does this sound like competency across the board? Quite bizarre. Police Chief Mark Beckner said he doesn't see strong similarities between the cases, primarily because Jonbenet was killed while the other girl, a 14-year-old, escaped serious injury. But last week he ordered comparisons of partial palm prints found at both scenes. Chief Beckner said the prints appear to be from different parts of the hand, but he assigned a detective to re-examine that issue to see if there was something that he missed. Something that we missed. He said he did not know when the results would be available. Now, again, it's kind of weird to dismiss. Like, if there's a bunch of assaults and one of them involves murder, one of them doesn't, does that mean that the perpetrator is not the same? I mean, things go wrong. Accidents happen, especially in terms of violent crimes. Things go wrong. It's just so weird how even police chiefs don't understand. I mean, I don't know. It's really, really bizarre. And again, I'm not saying that, I'm not theorizing that this individual is the same. It's just to say that it can't be him because there was a death. It's weird. It's really weird. It's not like we have a bunch of other cases to compare to. The Ramseys, who planned to meet with Boulder police late this month, were told about the second case on Monday. What the heck? The fact that an assault was made in a home of a young girl in Boulder within 9 months of Jonbenet's assault is hugely significant, Mr. Ramsey said. Fortunately, there are not that many creatures like this out there, so this is very significant. He said he was eager to learn more details about the other assault. It is kind of weird, though. They don't even tell the parent. I mean, these people all live close by, and they're not even given a warning that there's this predator on the loose in the neighborhood. I mean, I don't know. This Boulder area seems really weird. Wow. The Ramseys' attorney Linwood and investigators who reviewed the police reports last week said that the assault on the 14-year-old and the Ramseys' version of Jonbenet's final night have similar elements. Mr. Ramsey confirmed Monday that Jonbenet took lessons at Dance West, a studio where the second victim had performed. The studio owner, Lee Klinger, said he has never been contacted by police investigating either case. Both girls performed at public functions in Boulder before being victimized, not long before being victimized. The 14-year-old girl danced in several public performances in the year before her assault. Jonbenet, the reigning Little Miss Christmas, was featured in a holiday parade shortly before she was killed. Huh. They didn't even talk to the owner to ask if there was any weird people hanging around. I mean, just the typical questions in any kind of comprehensive, legitimate investigation. It is really bizarre. It's really bizarre. And continuing the article here, investigators surprised. Investigators who worked on the Ramsey case for Boulder DA Alex Hunter said they were surprised last week to learn about the second attack. I'm shocked, said Steve Ainsworth, a Boulder County Sheriff's detective who spent a year as a consultant on the case to Mr. Hunter. I think this is something that definitely should have been brought up. I was pretty amazed at the similarities. According to Boulder police report, there was no sign of forced entry in either incident. The 14-year-old's attacker knew her by name, while a ransom note in the Ramsey case suggested Jonbenet's killer somehow knew her family. In both cases, the sexual assault was penetration by a finger or object, police reports said. Mr. Ainsworth, who has never ruled out an intruder in the Ramsey slang, said the second case shows that the Ramseys theory is plausible. One of the things that people are saying is, well, what did this guy do? Go in there and hide for a couple hours until they came home? Like as if that's something that would never happen? That it's so stupid no one would ever consider it, Mr. Ainsworth said. Well, that's what happened in this case. Nevertheless, Chief Beckner said he did not see strong similarities. Asked if he was confident that the cases are not connected, he said, I think as reasonably as you can be at this point. The problem with this kind of work is you never want to say yes or no definitively until you know the answer, he said. So I would not rule anything out, but I would be skeptical that they are related. Well, shouldn't they be thoroughly investigated whether they're related or not? Mr. Ramsey said he wanted to limit criticism of the Boulder police, particularly in light of fresh talks scheduled with investigators this month in Atlanta, where the family moved after the slaying. However, he said the police have operated on an eliminate the defenses approach. No, it can't be that because, and no, it can't be this because, and what do they have left? Well, it's got to be the Ramseys. A grand jury considered evidence in the Ramsey case for 13 months, but disbanded in October 1999 without returning an indictment. R.W. Peterson, a Denver PI hired by the 14-year-old's family, said her case was never seriously examined by police for possible links to the Ramsey case. They're not really connecting any of this stuff, he said. They're only looking at the parents because they're so invested in it. It's just preposterous. Mr. Ramsey said that the solution to Jonbenet's slaying lies outside his family and that the key might be found in such cases as the 97 assault. We know for an absolute fact that there was an intruder in our house, Mr. Ramsey said, and we believe that he was there when we got home and he waited until we were asleep. And that second case fits. Attack got little attention. The September 97 crime received no media coverage at the time, despite the heavy presence of reporters from around the country following the Ramsey saga. And again, I have to interject here, because if it's possible for this kind of crime to go that far under the radar, what other crimes are under the radar that could possibly be connected? According to the 33-page police report, the family was out of the house from late afternoon on the eve of the crime until after dark. The girl's father was out of town traveling. An older sibling was away at college. The mother and daughter watched television, then prepared for bed. They thought they were alone in their home, a $595,000 property in an older upscale section of this university town. The mother set the security alarm at 11 p.m., The back door, which was unlocked until then, is presumed to have been the intruder's point of entry. Slipping in before the alarm was set, the intruder would have had to wait at least 4 hours before entering the girl's second-floor bedroom, said Mr. Peterson, the private investigator. He had to have been in already because she set the alarm, Mr. Peterson said. At 3:17 a.m., the mother woke to what she thought was the sound of her daughter having bad dreams. She called the girl's name but got no response. Then, hearing the sound of whispering, the mother grabbed a canister of mace. As she approached her daughter's room, a man dressed in black with a black ball cap worn backward bolted out the door, dashed down the hall into the master bedroom, and fled through a door that opens into the second-floor roof. The mother and child fled through a door on the ground floor, triggering the security alarm. The 14-year-old told police that when the suspect entered her room, she thought it might be her father having returned from his trip. But then the intruder crouched by the bed. He told her to shut up and put his hand over her mouth. "Don't scream," he ordered. "I know who you are. I'll hurt you." He called her by name and threatened to knock her out. The 14-year-old told police that the man sexually assaulted her with his hand and orally, but was interrupted by her mother. Although saliva contains DNA and the victim was swabbed soon after the assault, no foreign DNA was recovered from her body. In the Ramsey case, a small sample of DNA was recovered from Jonbenet's underwear. The source hasn't been determined, even though police have DNA samples from many of the Ramseys' friends and family members. The mother described
the assailant as 5'7", 20 to 30 years old with blonde hair. She noted that he had an angular, thin face with a jawline that really stood out. Some not told of the case. Even though 3 Boulder police investigators working the Ramsey case also investigated the September 97 incident, several other Ramsey investigators had never been told about it. Again, does this sound like a competent department? Mr. Hunter, who was retiring after 28 years as DA, declined to comment on either case. Mr. Peterson, the family's private eye, said he thinks the 2 cases could be connected. I think there is a possibility. The MO is great. The guy was in the house for quite a while, he said. The Ramseys have made a similar claim in their daughter's killing. Mr. Ramsey states in The Death of Innocence, the book he wrote with Patsy, I believe he entered our house during our Christmas night absence and was hiding when we returned, possibly in the basement. The killer probably crept silently up the spiral stairs after we had fallen asleep and got into Jonbenet's bedroom without waking anyone. A supplemental police report states that the parents of the 14-year-old, whose name has been withheld to protect the juvenile's identity, both believe that the suspect may have been the same suspect in the Jonbenet Ramsey murder. So the 14-year-old's parents believe that it might be the same guy. While the 14-year-old was not violently harmed, Jonbenet was found strangled and beaten in her parents' basement about 7 hours after her mother reported finding a note demanding $118,000 for the safe return of the kindergartner. Chief Beckner points to the Ramsey ransom note and the girl's body being found in the family's basement as a major distinguishing feature from the second crime. But Mr. Ainsworth, the detective who was a consultant for the DA's office, disagreed, noting that the second crime was interrupted. Where does it otherwise end, Mr. Ainsworth said. We know where Jonbenet ended, but we don't know where this other one would have ended, which is another good point. Mr. Ramsey agreed. Well, the second guy wasn't done when he was surprised in the act, Mr. Ramsey said. Lou Smit, a veteran Colorado Springs homicide detective who came out of retirement to work on the Ramsey case for about 18 months, was one of the few investigators who agreed to be quoted about the second case. He said he firmly believes an intruder killed Jonbenet. The person who assaulted the second girl was a high-risk criminal, he said. From my experience, there are many instances of high-risk crimes being committed. It's not that uncommon. Some criminals seem to get great pleasure out of these high-risk situations. I believe this is the type of individual who killed Jonbenet. All right, so the last point here I wanted to go over is Lou Smit, who some believe was paid off by the Ramseys. So Lou Smit worked on the case until his death in 2010. He kept a spreadsheet of all suspects in the case, which is estimated to contain between 50 and 60 persons of interest. His daughter explained on The Killing of Jonbenet, Truth Uncovered, Lou was working this case up until the day he died. He was very concerned that it was going to die with him. He started doing a lot of the investigation on his own, but his frustration there was that he had absolutely no investigative powers at all. So we're going to get into even more mind-shocking territory here. So there were over 100 burglaries in the area in the weeks and months before Jonbenet's death. The community also has a high concentration of sex offenders. There were 38 registered sex offenders within 2 miles of the family's house at the time of the murder. That's pretty scary. Some people counter that that's most areas, but we're talking specifically this area. So, of course, retired Colorado detective Lou Smit, one of the Ramsey's case's original investigators, held tightly to his theory that an intruder could have entered Ramsey's home through a window in the cellar, something that Boulder Police Department claimed was impossible before eventually revisiting once the case was reopened in 2009. Smith's 2001 re-examinations of evidence drive the film in favor of the defense, even after the longtime investigator's death in 2010. This is from the Rolling Stone article, TV recaps Killing of Jonbenet, The Truth Uncovered. Still, the previously archived footage of Smit gingerly entering the basement window himself is one of the special's most compelling moments. Smit explains how he was first inspired to take the intruder through the window theory into his own hands once he discovered a smudge on the wall in a photograph of the crime scene. The mark looked to him as though someone could have scuffed the wall, shimmying through the vertical window, which was found open at the crime scene. There also appeared to be finger marks on the glass and an unidentified footprint on the suitcase that stood below it. A suitcase which Smit believed was part of the intruder's plan to sneak her body out of the house. It was later discovered that foliage had grown around the metal grill that blocked the entrance to the window, meaning that the grate had most likely been moved at some point. So here's an article summing up Smit's theory. This is from the Denver Post, March 13th, 2000. Ex-cop Jonbenet killed by intruder. Private investigator Lou Smit, who's the ex-cop. Okay. Carpet fibers on a baseball bat and leaves and packing peanuts found near Jonbenet Ramsey's body helped convince veteran detective Lou Smit that an intruder killed the little girl. Smit said Sunday that a small piece of foam packing material found in the wine cellar near Jonbenet Ramsey's body was likely dragged in by an intruder who got into the home through a basement window. When Boulder Police Department photographed the window after the little girl's body was found December 26, 96, it was all the way open, Smit said. The 64-year-old homicide detective is officially retired, but he said he works almost every day on finding Jonbenet's killer. My goal is to find the killer, Smit said from his home in Colorado Springs. I believe that a very dangerous person is out there and more effort should be directed at catching him. Smit first revealed the popcorn packaging evidence to Newsweek reporter Dan Glick. Photos supplied by Smit will accompany a Newsweek story due out today. Smit said the death of Newsweek reporter Sherry Keene Osborne a few months ago from lupus prompted the release of evidence he says backs the intruder theory. He said Keene Osborne had operated on the presumption that the Ramseys are innocent. Smit also told Newsweek that DNA found under Jonbenet's fingernails is male, but doesn't match DNA samples taken from John Ramsey. And he said he discovered a wood splinter, apparently from the paintbrush handle used to make the garrote found around Jonbenet's neck on the carpet just outside the room where she was found. Police found fibers from the same carpet on a baseball bat discovered in bushes outside the family's Boulder home. Smit told Newsweek he believes the intruder used the baseball bat to beat Jonbenet. The longtime detective also believes Jonbenet was strangled before she was hit with the bat. Although a coroner's investigation did not determine whether a skull fracture or strangulation killed Jonbenet, Smit told Newsweek that lack of bleeding from the head wound indicates she was near death from strangulation before she was hit. Smit said there's strong evidence to indicate that Jonbenet struggled with her attacker and strong evidence indicating she was killed in the wine cellar. He said the ligature marks on Jonbenet and two very distinctive marks from a stun gun, one on her face and one on her back, were red, indicated that the injuries happened before the blow to the head. That blow to the head would have been so massive it's unlikely she would have been able to struggle, Smit said. Boulder DA Alex Hunter invited Smit to help with the investigation in March 1997, 3 months after the killing. But Smit left the Boulder DA's office in September 98 because he felt the investigation was too heavily focused on John and Patsy Ramsey. Smit maintains an intruder killed the little beauty queen. Smit testified before a grand jury that investigated Jonbenet's death, and his testimony is widely rumored to have been a major factor in persuading jurors not to indict John or Patsy Ramsey. The grand jury proceedings ended October 13, 1999. After 13 months, no indictments were issued. Boulder officials maintain that the investigation continues. However, DA Alex Hunter last week announced he will not seek an 8th term in office, raising questions about the future of the investigation. Smit's revelations come as John and Patsy Ramsey embark on a media tour to promote their book, The Death of Innocence, which is due to go on sale Friday. The Ramseys, who have consistently maintained they had nothing to do with Jonbenet's death, will appear in a handful of TV interviews this week. The couple, who now live in Atlanta with their son Burke, have pledged that proceeds from the book will help pay their legal bills and benefit a foundation established in their daughter's memory. So that gives us a little bit of backstory on Lou Smit's involvement. And I don't know if we've talked about the footprint on the case, on the Samsonite suitcase placed below a broken window in the basement. So I guess some people believe that John Ramsey fabricated that to make it look like an intruder. I haven't really heard too many people discuss this particular footprint. This is another article from the Denver Post, March 14th. Actually, does not give the year here. 2000, probably March 14th, 2000. Ramsey killer may have left print on case by Aaron Emery and Karen Ogg. Jonbenet Ramsey's killer may have left a footprint on a Samsonite suitcase placed below a broken basement window in the Ramseys' Boulder home, the Denver Post has learned. The faint markings on the suitcase, possibly a footprint, bolsters retired homicide detective Lou Smit's theory that an intruder killed the 6-year-old beauty queen. The suitcase is in a peculiar position, said Bob Russell, a former DA who represents Smit and has reviewed evidence in the Ramsey case. It's not the normal position. It's perpendicular to the window. It's right below the window, like you put it there to step on. After years of silence, Smit has decided to go public with much of the evidence he believes points away from the Ramseys, the focus of the police investigation. His revelations coincide with the publication of the Ramseys book, Death of Innocence, which will be released Friday. Boulder DA Alex Hunter and Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner both said Monday that Smit doesn't have new information. There is absolutely nothing new that we weren't aware of and that hasn't been thoroughly investigated, Beckner said. Smith's assertion that police didn't pursue leads that might have led to other suspects is simply false, Beckner said. And if it wasn't false, what would Beckner say? Michael Caine, the prosecutor who led the grand jury investigation, also pointed out that a lot of information has developed since Lou Smit left the case almost 18 months ago. 3 months after Jonbenet Ramsey was found beaten and strangled in her parents' basement, December 26, 96, Hunter asked Smit to come out of retirement and help with the investigation. But in September 98, Smit quit, convinced the Ramseys didn't kill their daughter and that investigators were ignoring evidence pointing away from the couple. Since then, Smit has quietly carried on his own investigation and has enlisted the help of Russell and other Colorado Springs attorney Greg Walta. Russell served as a DA from 65 to 85 in El Paso and Teller counties, and Walta served as former head of the Colorado Public Defender's Office from 78 to 82. One of the first things Russell and Walta did for Smit, age 64, was iron out a legal agreement with Hunter's office. The agreement, reached March 30th, 1999, allows Smit to talk about the case if no one was charged by October 1st, 1999. That's weird. So were they anticipating someone would be charged by October 1st, 1999? Interesting. He chose not to make any statements while the grand jury was in session and has only recently started elaborating on the intruder theory with the media. I made sure that nobody can come after him legally because there was an effort to shut him up, Russell said. He's not doing this for money. He's not writing a book. This is altruism on his part. We've given legal approval that he can start talking. On Sunday, Smit told the Denver Post that a small piece of foam packing material found near Jonbenet's body was likely dragged in by the killer, who got into the home through the basement window. When Boulder police photographed the basement window after Jonbenet's body was found, the window was all the way open, Smit said. He also said it appears marks on her face and back were made by a stun gun. Police have discounted the stun gun theory, but Arapahoe County Coroner Michael Doberson now believes Smit may be right. This isn't rocket science, Doberson said. If it waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. He recently reviewed enlarged autopsy photographs shown to him by Smit and Newsweek magazine and says the marks are consistent with a particular kind of stun gun. Caine, who led the grand jury investigation, said, "We've exhaustively looked into the stun gun theory." Doberson backs Smith's theory that the little girl was strangled before she was beaten because there was little blood around the skull fracture. He theorizes Jonbenet was dead or close to death when she was struck in the head. Smit told Newsweek that DNA found under Jonbenet's fingernails is male but doesn't match the DNA samples taken from her father. Strangulation occurred before Jonbenet was struck in the head with a baseball bat, Smit said, contrary to the police theory. And then, of course, some people think she was struck in the head with a flashlight, or something else. So, again, these are just theories. But he also told Newsweek he discovered a wood splinter, apparently from the paintbrush handle used to make the garrote around Jonbenet's neck, on the carpet just outside the room where she was found. Police found fibers from the same carpet on a baseball bat discovered in bushes outside the family's Boulder home. Russell said he initially doubted Smit's theory that an intruder killed Jonbenet, but after reviewing the case, he concurs. Russell, who tried numerous homicide cases with Smit while he worked as a detective for the Colorado Springs Police Department, said there's too much unexplained evidence in the house. In my experience, which is considerable, I've never seen or heard of a parent garroting their child. The blow to the head is not pure accident, it was too strong, said Russell. I don't know how he would know that, but there's all kinds of different evidence pointing to an intruder, Russell said. Someone else did this, and it really makes me mad that they weren't looking for someone else besides the Ramseys. They should have been looking at the Ramseys, but they should have considered other people too. Walter said Smit is a relentless detective who was absolutely the most detailed I've ever come up against. And even more important, he's a man of absolute integrity. Never has he ever played with evidence or twisted it, Walter said. That even if evidence was helpful for the defendant, he never tried to hide it or alter the facts. Lou is absolutely trustworthy. You could go to the bank with his word, Walter said. Okay, but here's the thing. Was Lou Smit hired by the Ramseys? Was he paid to put forth a certain theory? Was he truly impartial? So several sources state that Smit worked for or was hired by the Ramseys. No one disputes Smit was hired by the DA initially, but according to multiple sources and a judge, he was also hired by the Ramseys, because apparently there are some people who are stating that he was never hired directly by the Ramseys and he was 100% impartial. So several articles here state that he was hired by the Ramseys from different sources. So from the Daily Camera, October 26th, 2016, federal judge dismisses lawsuit against the Ramseys. This article states, former police detective hired by the Ramseys, Lou Smit, had considerable experience and gathered abundant evidence in support of the intruder theory. Smit said he was working with Keenan, could not comment. Okay, Denver Post, August 12th, 2010, detective who defended Ramseys dies in Colorado. He became known nationally when he was coaxed out of retirement to help investigate the 1996 death of 6-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey, who was found beaten and strangled in the basement of a parent's Boulder home December 26, 96. Smit later resigned because he believed authorities were wrongly focused on the parents, John and Patsy. Smit said unidentified DNA under Jonbenet's fingernails and on her underpants pointed to an intruder as the culprit, not her parents. He later worked for the Ramseys. From Buffalo News, May 27th, 2003, San Agustin said he learned about the case from Lou Smit, a retired El Paso sheriff's detective who has worked for the Ramseys. And then, of course, even the Wikipedia states Smit later worked for the Ramseys in helping establish their innocence. So this is a judge and multiple other sources corroborating Smit was hired by the Ramseys. So now that we have addressed the Lou Smit issues, it seems like he did work for the DA. He thought they were wrongly focusing on the Ramseys, but he also worked directly for the Ramseys. I don't know in what universe you can say that doesn't involve some kind of transaction. I mean, even if they were only paying research fees or whatever, travel fees, work fees, even if they weren't paying him directly just to investigate, they were just compensating him. I don't know. I don't know what worked for the Ramseys means from all these different sources, if it can mean something other than working for them. But is there, so let's look at the evidence outside of Lou Smit again. So John Ramsey initially said, and the housekeeper also said it had to be an inside job. So here's another mind shock. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. So that fall in 1996, a man broke into the Ramseys' Michigan home. Of all the, so that home has 9 bedrooms. Anyone want to take a guess which bedroom he chose to sleep in out of the 9? You guys probably guessed it. Jonbenet's room is the room that he wanted to sleep in. The housekeeper found a small suitcase and a pair of cowboy boots sitting by the dresser. Men's clothing neatly packed. So the plot is going to thicken even further. I mean, here's a crazy, crazy mind shock. There were several encounters in Michigan with a man who supposedly had a grudge against John Ramsey. So here's a description from a guy at a gas station. Well-dressed bum, other times dressed nicer. Guy was older than college age, mid-30s, carried a lot of cash. He had a strange nose, like it had been broke in the past. He had longer hair, shoulder length, talked about ice skating. Said he had unfinished business in Colorado. This incident occurred end of September, early October. There was another incident. A man ran from the bushes by their Michigan home and was approached a handicapped driver and needed a ride to the airport. So is there someone stalking the Ramseys primarily in Michigan, but if he's a stalker and he knows the family, knows John Ramsey, he would also know of their Boulder home. Or if he didn't previously, he might learn of it. So this is really, really bizarre. So this is in Charlevoix, Michigan. What's kind of weird, though, is this intruder, he left behind a suitcase and cowboy boots. That's kind of weird. So this incident was reported to Boulder police in January 97, but supposedly they didn't report it earlier. That's kind of weird. So January 5th, 97, Boulder PD issued search warrant for Charlevoix house on suspected breaking and entering. So in fall of 96, Laura Steeb went to the house and found it open. She found a very neatly packed suitcase at the foot of Jonbenet's bed, cowboy boots sitting behind the suitcase. She reported Jonbenet's bed had obviously been slept in. No other sign of anyone in the house. Boulder Police Department never sealed the bedroom or took evidence. So they didn't take any DNA evidence. They didn't take any kind of fingerprints or anything from that room. That's really bizarre. The housekeeper had gone to the house at the request of Patsy to check a wine stain on the carpet. There was a charity function at the house the previous weekend. No forced entry. So they supposedly Boulder Police Department came to the house 3 times, never once dusted for fingerprints in Jonbenet's room. So the bedding wasn't bagged. The housekeeper thought the police did it. Really bizarre. Really bizarre. So there was a January search of the Ramseys' Michigan vacation home. And so this was Rocky Mountain News. Cops sought clues to threats, November 7th, 97. Police investigating the Jonbenet Ramsey murder case searched the family's Michigan vacation home in early January to look for evidence of break-ins or threats against the family. The affidavit and search warrant released Thursday by District Judge Richard May allowed police to search the white Victorian-style home in the resort town of Charlevoix for answering machine tapes, caller ID devices, and documents that contained threats against any of the Ramseys. They found nothing, and they took nothing out of the house, Rochelle Zimmer, spokeswoman for the family, said. That's weird, though. So if there was a break-in and someone slept in her bed and they didn't check anything, it's just really weird. The accompanying affidavit signed by Harmer said, quote, there may be evidence that the Charlevoix home may have been watched by the perpetrators, who may have called or sent letters there to monitor the comings and goings of the Ramsey family, end quote. Harmer said she also believed, quote, the security of the Charlevoix home may have been compromised by the perpetrators, end quote. She did not elaborate. Quite bizarre. A judge signed yet another warrant December 26th for a still publicly undisclosed property in Boulder County. That warrant will remain sealed unless an arrest is made in the murder. So apparently there was another property search that we don't know about and we won't know about. Yeah, this is all quite rough. And there are just serious questions about the Boulder police investigation, particularly in relating to the Charlevoix incident and relating to many other things as well. So John Ramsey, I guess he could be lying, but in the August 2000 John Ramsey Atlanta interview, CBS 48 Hours, he stated, "We had an incident of someone sleeping in Jonbenet's bed while we were gone. We had the incident of someone running down the hill saying they were going to get even with me and harm my daughter. I don't know if there's anything there or not, but I think it's foolish not to look at that." So it would be interesting to see that corroborated. I'm assuming there must have been other witnesses there because I don't think that's the only reference to that. So there were 3 incidents in Charlevoix. So the guy at the gas station, as described, well-dressed bum, other times dressed nicer, older than college age, mid-30s, carried a lot of cash. So the housekeeper, there were 2 housekeepers. The second housekeeper said she had never seen the suitcase before at the house. Male house guests usually stayed in the boys' bunk room or in the guest bedroom downstairs, so they wouldn't be sleeping in any of the kids' rooms or the master bedroom. She also said another housekeeper who helped that summer, there was another housekeeper who helped that summer, but she has never been contacted. She has since moved away from the area. Uh-oh. Charlevoix is a resort area. Most everything is within walking distance. I think the guy fleeing had to make a quick getaway and may have been startled. Even though the house faces Belvedere, it is normally entered off of Hurlbutt through the garage or the front door, which is at the side of the house. He could have been hanging out at the bottom of the hill just casing the place. There are bushes and it would be easy to do so. The tabloids did it, so it can be done. Huh. Because the Ramseys were there for Labor Day, then they left. The housekeepers went in and cleaned. The house was used for a private party. The Ramseys were not in attendance. Close friends were the host and hostess in mid-September. After the party, Patsy called the housekeeper to go check a wine stain, so I'm guessing they informed them that the party was fine. There was just one stain or something. John's brother was due to arrive the following weekend. And apparently the housekeepers were never contacted by Boulder police. They had some kind of questionnaires, returned the questionnaires. The Boulder Police Department did come to Charlevoix, but did not contact the housekeepers. Really weird. The information about the suitcase and the cowboy boots was not made public until it came out in the book Death of Innocence. So in the late fall of 96, there was a man hanging out at the local Shell station going on about Colorado. Brought up John's name, talked about skating, wore a long coat, well-groomed, did not drive, had lots of cash. Wheelchair guy driver tried to contact Ramsey family after Jonbenet's death in regards to a person he picked up fleeing out their front yard who wanted a ride to the airport. The husband of one of the house cleaners worked at the Shell station, reported this to Ramsey investigators in February 1997. Very interesting. Could this possibly be related? I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's possible. I mean, this guy is tied to Lockheed Martin, big business guy. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he had one or more rivals that might have wanted to harm him. They might have had nothing to do with Jonbenet Ramsey's murder, though. But either way, it's curious. This is weird. So someone posted this on a message board. The guy at the gas station would not have known the cashier was the husband of one of the housekeepers. It was not known, really, as it was a temp job. He did do a sketch with the original Ramsey investigators in the spring of 1997, but no one knows where it is, probably in one of the many boxes shipped to Linwood. Ramseys have never seen it. I'm not sure how this person knows this. Boulder Police Department came to the house 3 times, I believe, and never once dusted Jonbenet's room here. Even after they knew about the cowboy guy, never took the bedding, did not seal room. Another close friend and I were the ones who got the house ready for Ramsey June arrival, not the housekeepers in 97, and I should have bagged the bedding. I didn't, as I thought police knew what they were doing. I wish I had. So this is either one of the housekeeper's friends or someone who's responsible for keeping the house, allegedly. Wheelchair guy is pretty much incapacitated now. No one, to my knowledge, has ever questioned him thoroughly. He lives near me somewhere, but I have been told he isn't doing well. Wow. Okay, so nothing was followed up on or investigated. So Boulder Police Department are allegedly investigating possible leads about someone who might have wanted to harm the family or something, and they don't investigate any of this? I mean, how can you rule it out if you don't investigate it? It's very bizarre. There are also questions about the phone bill at the Charlevoix house. Apparently, Patsy said that there were irregular or weird calls on the bill that were never explained. I don't know how much that has been looked into. Other people here, apparently with connections to friends' family in the area, said there was a hidden key outside of the house. So if someone knew about that, and there was no alarm system at the house until after Jonbenet's death. So, a lot of unanswered questions in Charlevoix and in their Michigan house in Charlevoix. It's really bizarre. So, this is definitely a bungled investigation no matter how you look at it. I mean, from every angle. Whether there's enough evidence of an intruder or a burglar versus the parent. I mean, there's things that don't add up every which way. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast in the Jonbenet Ramsey series. Plenty more to come, plenty more to explore in typical mind-shocking, comprehensive, exhaustive fashion, looking at every single avenue and theory, upturning every stone like no other podcast does. This is Mindshock. If you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like this particular podcast, hit that like button. Share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Patreon. Patrons do get a priority for case topic, logical analyses, requests, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, depending on your tier. And if you're not getting notifications, you could just go to youtube.com/Mindshock and manually peruse our ever-expanding library of podcasts in true crime cases, conspiratorial topics, and the paranormal. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce Maguire signing off. Catch you guys next time.